Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 19th of June, 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Charles Mallett. Welcome to the programme, Charles.
Thank you, Mike.
And in Damascus, as usual, we have Vanessa Bailey. We'll get kicked off with the general election, or is it?
Well, exactly. Thanks, Mike, and good afternoon all. The question really to be asked, in light of the fact that the politicians and indeed the mainstream media aren't really concentrating on this, is what are people going to be voting for? So we'll start with a look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and the highlighted text there, the government saying the world we want to see by 2030. But exactly what do they mean by we, and have we really had a say in this? So on their paper, Implementing the SDGs, they talk about the most effective way to delivering it is by ensuring that the goals are fully embedded in planned activity of each government department. The most effective mechanism for coordinating implementation is the departmental planning process. So they do appear to have all bases covered at the national government level. We check that the London Assembly is very much following the same agenda, and indeed they say that they set ambitious targets to create transformative social, economic and environmental progress by 2030. And critically, they say that governments cannot do this alone. Local government, businesses, the public sector, community groups and others must all play their part, a message which is reinforced by the Local Government Association, making the case for council engagement with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So it really has seeped in absolutely everywhere. They say why councils should implement the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is to hit the targets by 2030, depending on action at the local level. And councils being key actors, of course, they reference health and well-being. They go on to say that the councils will provide a framework for strategic planning, policy review and action for sustainable development. Of course, planning being one of the major taskings of local authorities. So further, they reinforce the declaration that there is a climate emergency. That is now unequivocal, of course, and that's written down in not just policy, but also legislation. So devolution we may have, but with it comes lockstep. Here's the Climate Change Act, Scotland 2009, in which they say that the target setting criteria are the likely impact of the target on the achievement of sustainable development, including the achievement of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Same score in Northern Ireland with the Climate Change Act there from 2022, in which they say the likely impact of the budget on the achievement of sustainable development, including the achievement of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So now we look to Wales with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act from 2015, in which they say that Future Trends report the Welsh ministers must take account of any action taken by the United Nations in relation to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So you get the picture, but further, going back to the local authorities, we look at the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities and the critical National Planning Policy Framework from December of last year, in which they refer to the purpose of the planning system being to contribute to the achievement of sustainable development. And of course, where's this come from? Well, in actual fact, it's come from a high level. They talk about similarly high level. Members of the United Nations, including the United Kingdom, have agreed to pursue the 17 global goals for sustainable development in the period to 2030. If you are wondering why this matters, it concerns what may be described as vested interests. So we have statistics here from 2010, the Chief Executive Board for Coordination, showing where non-government donations come from. At the top, very big category there, from the European Union, but the red arrows point to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the multi-donor trust funds, Rotary International and World Bank Group. And I should point out the total there is just over £2 trillion. So we'll go on to 2022, by which time you see that the European Union is still a major donor, but that there are more contributors in this effectively non-government donor system, the World Bank Group, unnamed private donors, Multi-Partner Trust Fund Office, Global Environment Facility, United States Fund for UNICEF, the Gavi Alliance, which of course concerns vaccines and is largely controlled by Bill and Melinda Gates, or at least Bill Gates, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and unnamed multi-donor trust funds. I should also point out that the arrow from the Gates Foundation points mostly to the World Health Organization. So there is, without doubt, a conflict of interest in what governments are doing, or at least what the government of the four nations of the United Kingdom are doing. So are they going to confront any of this in their manifestos? Here they are from Reform UK, Liberal Democrats, Conservative and Unionist Party and Labour Party of this year. Well, only two of those four actually mention the Sustainable Development Goals. The Conservatives say that they will ensure that aid and development supports our strategic objectives with a focus on fragile states. We will work with our partners to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. So they do want to make a note in their manifesto that this is what they're going to do, in talking about it in the International Development White Paper. The Lib Dems similarly say that they remain committed to delivering the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals in the UK, and they're going to put those goals at the heart of the UK's international development policy. Now, for a great amount of detail on this, I would encourage you to go to the UK Column shop and pick up a copy of Agenda 21, Your Life in Their Hands, originally written by Martin Edwards in 2013 and effectively updated by Mike Robinson just now. And many thanks to all those who have already purchased a copy. They are flying off the shelves, but do get into it. There's a phenomenal level of detail in that. Now, of course, these are exactly the sorts of questions we would want to ask politicians about. And indeed, I've been in touch with the leaders of the four parties shown: Sunak, Ed Davey, Nigel Farage and Keir Starmer. I have written to them 4 times each, and I have had no response, not even an acknowledgement of my email. It is not credible that they have not received the email with the staffing levels that they would have. But anyway, in terms of accountability and conflict of interest, of course, it's well known that Keir Starmer had his Davos Westminster moment, which has been played many times. But here we are, just a reminder that Sunak and Starmer are both effectively under the umbrella of the World Economic Forum, in addition, of course, to the United Nations. Now, we're just going to have a bit of a look at reform, because the influence there coming from a different direction, and it just gives that potential for there being conflict, or at least effectively not exactly declaring where the direction of travel might be coming from. The Byline Times talking about political business brought to you by billionaires, and specifically they talk about Chris Harborne, who has given around £10 million to the Brexit or Reform Party as it's now become, and he's made his fortune in aviation, fuel and tech investing. He's also in the Panama Papers. But significantly, he's the largest shareholder in Kinetic, the UK defence technology company. Now, we've talked about this quite a bit, but as they say here, it's been boosted by the Ukraine war with rising sales of products. And here we just feature one of them, which we've concentrated on UK Column quite a lot before, the Dragonfire laser program. Kinetic have a stake in that. So therefore, we look at how this might affect reform. In their defence part of the manifesto, they say that they're going to increase spending to 2.5% of GDP by year 3, then up to 3% within 6 years. But critically, with reference to Harborne and Kinetic, we're going to regenerate Britain's defence manufacturing and technology and introduce incentives and tax breaks to boost the UK defence industry. Now, of course, were they to do that in a position of power, it might not look very good for them when their funding is examined. If by this stage you are wondering what on earth to do with your vote and how necessary Parliament actually is, we'll just have a quick look at what the House of Commons does do when it's in session and whether life carries on without them or not. Now, I don't mean to suggest that MPs are doing nothing when they're not sitting in Parliament. That patently is not the case. But nonetheless, it is worth pointing out that an average of 170 days per annum are spent sitting in Parliament. And yet, of course, by and large, the country continues to function. We've talked a lot about the sorts of candidates that are going to be standing this year, and so I should just make it clear that there is a record number of candidates standing in this general election, which does suggest there is a great degree of voter dissatisfaction, or at least opportunities seen by those that may not necessarily have seen them before. And of course, we've talked about the 4th of July as being Independence Day, and there are 459 independent candidates stepping forward at this general election, which is a vast total, very, very significant number. But of course, it still does present the question, do you have an independent to vote for? Do you necessarily want to give that independent your vote? And indeed, if not, what other alternatives do we have? Now, Toby Young, I believe, put out a tweet this morning, he of Free Speech Union fame, and I think it's fair to say that he has had an incorrect reading of the situation, in that he's talked about not voting, but of course not voting is effectively abstaining, and it's meaningless because it doesn't get counted. However, a ballot paper that is spoiled, although the Electoral Commission effectively write it up that it's not counted because it's deemed to be rejected, that's not the case. And this is from the Electoral Commission readout from the 2019 general election, where they quite clearly do count the numbers of votes that are rejected. So that's really sort of the summary of the general election at the moment, and the sort of thing that I'm afraid is not being discussed in the mainstream. We'll wait to see if any of those party leaders do actually come back and decide that they're going to give UK Column the time of day. I sincerely hope that they do.
Now, on Friday, we were talking about Anne McCluskey and what had happened to her last week. And, well, some of that wasn't actually correct. So I just want to correct what we reported last week. Before we do that, here's the Telegraph. And this is the front page from today. And if we look on the right-hand side here of the front page, wipe clean all COVID fines, says ex-minister. So this is Robert Buckland. And he's suggesting that the outstanding fines need to be just forgotten about. That was one of the points that we were making last week. That there were so many of these outstanding still. Now, I'm not clear whether they're making the suggestion because they think that they're pointless continuing with it, or it's just that the courts are never going to catch up with these. But nonetheless, Anne McCluskey was singled out. So let's bring her on screen and let's look at what actually happened to her. So first of all, she was picked up by the police as she was delivering her election documents to the post office. My understanding is that if she hadn't been quite swift about getting into the building, they might have had her before she had actually managed to get her election documents submitted. But anyway, she did get them in and she was arrested on the way back out again. She was taken to a cell in Coleraine. She was told she would be taken to the court the following day whenever she was expected to appear in court. But in fact, what happened instead was she was taken to a room in the police station and provided with a video link. She was unable to see what was going on in the actual courtroom and asked, for example, whether there were any witnesses in the courtroom, and was told that there absolutely were witnesses in the courtroom, including journalists. But of course, she had no actual ability to verify that. So if we put that back up on screen then, as she was speaking to the judge, a police officer muted her mic. And then when she attempted to unmute the mic, she describes it as an assault. So I've no reason to disbelieve that. She went on to say that she was then sent to prison and then she was subsequently released from prison. So she was released from prison quite quickly. And this was originally told to her because her husband had paid the fine. That was not the case. She was then told that it was because an anonymous supporter paid the fine. So at this point, she has no knowledge of who has paid the fine or whether the fine has been paid, but nonetheless, she was released. And the key points here are that there has been a complete breach of criminal procedure rules, in my opinion, and also, in my opinion, a clear effort, as we mentioned on Friday, to interfere with the general election. Now, I'm going to say that this issue of criminal procedure rules it has many parallels with civil procedure rules. And going back many years, we were discussing the Tom Crawford case where he was having his home removed. And on screen there's Guy Taylor talking about that. And of course, he was also involved in looking at civil procedure rules. And of course, we have these rules in place in order to make sure that people are treated fairly by the courts and by the court system. And if those rules are subverted or shortcutted or removed, then of course those protections are also removed. And in Anne McCluskey's case, it's absolutely clear that the procedures were not followed properly. And she has a reason to believe that she was therefore not treated fairly, lawfully, however you want to express it. Now, one of the points that she has made is that in Northern Ireland, the coronavirus emergency legislation has been extended. And so this is the newsletter from Belfast. And the headline is from March, the 11th of March. Stormont rejects extending anti-democratic COVID powers on health, but keeps them for the courts. And if we look down at this, it's saying, however, Justice Minister Naomi Long did get approval from the Assembly to extend emergency COVID laws, which allow the wider use of live links by courts. So this is the excuse, it appears, that they've used in order to make sure that and did not get into an actual courtroom in front of a judge and so on, and therefore they were in much better position to control the proceedings and so on. But now, in the time that we've got today, I probably haven't given this the justice that it deserves. So if you want to get the full story, Anne McCluskey on her Substack here has a video that she released on Friday evening, I believe, just immediately after she was released from prison. Important. Dr. Anne McCluskey speaks about her recent unlawful arrest and internment without trial under COVID-19 emergency powers. The full details are on that, and hopefully we will get the opportunity to speak to Anne very soon in interview form and get the latest from her very, very soon, but possibly after the election, because of course she is standing. So we wish her good luck with that. Now let's move on to international. Before we do that, one other point that Anne is making here, and that is that of course, when we look at who's running the criminal or the court system, the IT systems for the courts, which enable these live links and so on, it is Fujitsu. So this is ICOS. This is their courts management system, and also they've got a system called Causeway, launched in 2002. And that sort of links together various organizations, including the police, the prison service, the court service, and the rest. So it is interesting that Fujitsu is the choice for IT provider there. But let's move on to international affairs and welcome Vanessa to the program. And Vanessa, let's get started with what's been going on in the Red Sea.
Yes, very interesting escalation. Beloved Yemen, as they are known regionally for their resistance. And of course, what they're doing is entirely justified under the Genocide Convention. They are punishing and attempting to prevent genocide. So this was actually translated from Arabic to Al Masira, the Yemeni media, the main Yemeni media. So let's have a look at what they're saying. Drone boats in maritime warfare. The Yemeni armed forces possess advanced weaponry and military capabilities, particularly in naval weapons. They have demonstrated significant technological advancements in this area. These include offensive technologies achieved by only a few countries globally. The clue is there, such as Russia, China, and the United States. Of course, Yemen has been capturing US manufactured weapons from the Saudi coalition that has been trying to beat Yemen into submission since March 2015. But the arsenal includes various tactical and strategic weapons, such as naval mines, suicide drones, unmanned submarines, and a formidable array of land-to-sea missiles. Among these, unmanned surface vessels, USVs, are a critical innovation developed by Yemeni engineers to protect maritime sovereignty and counter threats from enemy ships and fleets. So let's just have a look at some of the technical details. I won't dwell on them too much. People can freeze frame and read it for themselves. But cost effectiveness and ease of use, manufacturing USVs is relatively inexpensive and straightforward, requiring minimal financial and logistical resources, stealth and precision. Destructive power, USVs can carry explosive charges up to 450 kilos, capable of destroying heavily fortified naval vessels, such as destroyers and frigates. They function as guided maritime bombs, surpassing torpedoes and surface missiles in destructive capability. So let's have a look at the latest British boat to have been under attack. And these were two messages from 7 and 8 a.m. this morning. British maritime trade operations, marine debris and oil from the ship Totor have been reported in the last known location of the ship, which was basically, as it says, in the Red Sea off the coast of Hodeidah, where the UK and the US have been carrying out punitive airstrikes against Ansarullah, against the resistance forces in Yemen. So let's just have a look at a quick video of the approaching USV from the crew on the Totor ship that has now sunk.
It's coming, huh?
I mean, it must be noted, of course, that these ships are only targeted when they refuse to turn around and continue as with Israel as their destination. So they are given the opportunity to cease heading towards Israel. But this is interesting. This is Chinese experts and analysts. Yemen's targeting of the U.S. Aircraft carrier Eisenhower shakes U.S. strategic dominance. So this was basically China National Radio highlighted the Yemeni armed forces targeting of the American aircraft carrier Eisenhower. One of China's most influential national media institutions reported on the significant event. So let's have a look at what they're saying. It's worth noting, of course, that the United States denied the targeting of the Eisenhower and tried to produce on social media, in particular, videos showing the Eisenhower without damage, but eagle-eyed social media followers pointed out that the video was at least a month old. So basically, the Li Yu, the analyst, highlighted that since 2024, the Yemeni armed forces have projected a robust image, attracting public attention with actions like blockading waterways and supporting Palestine. He goes on to say that Ansarullah's evolution into a force daring enough to challenge American carrier exemplifies the Chinese proverb, "He who digs a pit for his brother falls into it," emphasizing the irony and the unexpected nature of this development for the United States. The attack on the Eisenhower signifies the shattering of the myth of invincibility surrounding American carrier groups. The psychological impact on the US military outweighs any physical damage, strategically undermining American dominance. The US previously threatened nuclear retaliation for any attack on its carriers, a deterrent many feared. However, with Yemen's direct assault on the carrier, whether successful or not, the question arises, will the US wage a nuclear war against Yemen? Clearly, it's not feasible, meaning the illusion of unchallengeable dominance has burst. And this is the significant implication of the Yemeni armed forces attack on the American aircraft carrier. Very interesting, considering the fact that China obviously is in the US crosshairs, particularly the naval crosshairs.
Yes, and I mean, do we know what actually caused that ship to sink? I mean, was it
the total, the British ship?
Yes.
Well, presumably they targeted the hull, I would guess, and it took on water because it was some time. I think it was at least 24 hours between the time that it was targeted and the time that it sunk. So presumably the crew members, I haven't seen anything declaring that crew members were lost, were able to be evacuated, and the ship has since gone down. That's the second British ship that has been sunk by the Yemenis.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Vanessa. Okay. If you like what the UK column does, you would like to support us, support.ukcolumn.org is the place to go. We do need your support. It's only your help that keeps us going. So thank you very much for everybody that does help us out. We do need that help. But in any case, we absolutely need people to start sharing much more of our content on the various platforms. So ukcolumn.org and ukcolumnextracts.co.uk are the links that we prefer that everybody uses. But of course, we're also on Twitter and in other places as well, not on Facebook anymore. And as Charles mentioned at the beginning of the program, if you would like to pick something up at the UK Column shop, that would be fantastic as well. A quick reminder that blocked by the MHRA reported to the Health Security Agency a day in the life of vaccine injured Adam Rowland. That went out at 1 p.m. yesterday. That's now on the website if you'd like to see that and you didn't manage to catch it yesterday. And tomorrow, Brian is interviewing an independent candidate for Devon Southwest, Daryl Ingram, and that will go out at 1 p.m. tomorrow. So please join us for that. And a reminder of the Sounds Beautiful Festival taking place in Wimborne and Dorset, 27th to 30th. We're getting very close to that now, and we will be there. So if you can possibly join us for that would be fantastic. So where does that take us, Charles? The reimagining what? Warfare or defence?
Well, quite. Just before we get on to that, also a reminder that we will be running a live event in Bristol on the 19th of October. So there'll be more detail to come on that, but get
Thank
it in
you
the
for
diary.
that. Yes.
Cool. Okay, so reimagining defence. Now, the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change is breaking new ground. We'll just put the slide on screen now. Reimagining defence and security from the 11th of June. And rather than explain exactly what it was all about, we'll get the flavour of it from a video of a chap called Daniel Sleet speaking.
Modern conflicts show that drones are better than tanks. Yeah, I think this is a really important point to think through and be clear about. From my point of view, the lessons of what's happening in Ukraine and on the battlefields around the world isn't necessarily that new technologies are emerging completely at the expense of old technologies. It's that the mix of capabilities you need is changing. What are some of your ideas on the future of defence? We're currently experiencing the highest number of conflicts per year than at any time since the Second World War. That tells me that we need to be much better prepared for conflict if we want to avoid it. Nothing can do what a soldier can do. Yes, that's very true. We've seen in combat in recent years, particularly in Ukraine, the enduring importance of ground soldiers. Technology like drones is fundamentally changing warfare, but soldiers are vital in holding and taking territories. Hacking is now the only frontier that matters. Cyber warfare is becoming really, really important. It is changing how we defend ourselves globally and how we defend ourselves as a nation. That has to form part of the right mix of capabilities that we have as a country.
You will have made your own judgments on the amount of experience that Daniel has to qualify any of the statements he's just made. But we'll have a look at his LinkedIn profile, in which he's described as being the Senior Policy Advisor at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. And how has he got there? Well, he has been a political advisor to Jack Straw after being a political advisor to Lord Carter of Coles, and he was then a special advisor to Tony Blair. Now, Blair and indeed his institute or his acolytes have form in this regard in sort of effectively creating a culture of not really knowing what's going on. And I refer back to a publication in 2010, Jonathan Pole, Blair's former chief of staff, writing The New Machiavelli about the events of 2006 after Richard Dannett, the then chief of the general staff, wrote in the Mail a controversial piece about whether or not the British troops should be in Iraq. And predictably, it did not go down well at Downing Street. But this is just an indication of how they thought at the time. And Pole says that it was quite clear to me that he was unsuited to his job, meaning Dannett. Tony explained to those present that politicians would not support maintaining a First Division army if they were caused too much political pain by serving generals speaking out. It was always easier for politicians not to risk soldiers' lives. Well, that's an interesting thing to mull over. But I fear he was too subtle for Dannett, who was divinely convinced of his own rightness. I can think of somebody else that fits that description. It would be another step towards losing the ability to control our destiny as a country, a far more important one than sharing our sovereignty in NATO or the EU. Already, we've lost the capacity to fight major operations by ourselves. We could no longer muster a task force like the one Britain sent to the Falklands, but sometimes war is necessary. After 9/11, it was clear that military action was essential, but we were all a bit hazy about Afghanistan and the Taliban, neither of which had been high on our radar screen till then. The day after the attack, I walked up Whitehall to Waterstones on Trafalgar Square. and bought all the books I could find on the Taliban. By far the best was Ahmed Rashid's Taliban, the story of Afghan warlords, and I sat at my desk and read it right through. Tony and Alistair were keen to borrow it once I had finished. I thought the sensible thing to do was send the Taliban an ultimatum. Well, never mind the Foreign Office or indeed the army or any Afghan specialists, a trip to Waterstones will do it. But that was the tenor with which the Blair administration of that period conducted business, and in effect now is a sort of a reiteration and effectively the use or the abuse of people who are sitting in office to further the ends of either Blair himself or any of his organisations. So just as a refresher, we look at the Commission for Africa, which of course he set up whilst Prime Minister into Africa, and then commented on there by Chatham House, saying Prime Minister Blair's personal commitment to Africa is in no doubt, indeed, but it should really be a professional commitment. Blair himself writing on his own website, marking the 10th anniversary of the Commission for Africa. But then, of course, the Africa Governance Initiative. Effectively, he had paved the way for a private enterprise by an action that he took whilst Prime Minister. So he says, it was for this reason I also set up the Africa Governance Initiative in 2007, to continue to work shoulder to shoulder with African counterparts to help deliver the life-changing improvements their citizens expect. That is a highly questionable statement, but he's at it again with the appointments of Nick Carter, General Sir Nick Carter, and Patrick Vallance, of course, joining the Blair Institute for Change earlier this year. And Carter, just to refresh your memory, has over 45 years of defence experience, culminating at the top of his profession as the Chief of the Defence Staff, where he was the principal military advisor to the Prime Minister, the National Security Council, and the Secretary of State for Defence, and as head of the UK Armed Forces. So he has connections of that, there's little doubt. Now, when Carter left and was considering what he might do in future, he was referred to the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments, and we look here at his paid employment with Helsing. Now, what does Helsing do? If you've not heard of it, it's a defence business that's concerned with artificial intelligence to serve our democracies. In particular, AI will be the key to protecting them. So they talk here about sea, land, and air. And if we remind ourselves of what was going on the 11th, Reimagining Defence, and indeed from that very document, harnessing cutting-edge software, they underpin the capabilities of hardware such as drones, as well as being essential for command and control systems. This is an area in which the West, as the home of companies with advanced defence AI capabilities such as Anduril, Palantir, and Helsing, hold a distinct advantage over Russia. And they go on, leading global governance for long-term influence. The UK should build on its success with the AI Safety Summit and establishment of the AI Safety Institute to expand the frameworks for testing and evaluating AI in high-risk military AI systems and develop norms for applying the existing international humanitarian law to the use of laws, by which they mean lethal autonomous weapon systems, basically drones. So it seems quite clear what the intent of the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change is in the very, very cynical use or deployment, should I say, of Nick Carter and his network into not just defence, but the defence hierarchy, but also the defence industry. And this is something that we will absolutely be watching for sure. But it seems very, very likely that it will influence the direction of travel of British defence policy.
So the question is, what's the direction of travel of NATO defence policy? And well, Jens Stoltenberg published this in the Sunday Telegraph this just past Sunday. NATO in talks, so this Telegraph calling this an exclusive, NATO in talks to deploy more nuclear weapons. So let's look at what he had to say. I won't go into operational details about how many nuclear warheads should be operational and which should be stored, but we need to consult on these issues. Transparency helps to communicate the direct message that we, of course, are a nuclear alliance. NATO's aim is, of course, a world without nuclear weapons. But as long as nuclear weapons exist, we will remain a nuclear alliance because a world where Russia, China, and North Korea have nuclear weapons and NATO does not is a more dangerous world. In a not very distant future, NATO may face something that has never faced before, and that is two nuclear-powered potential adversaries, China and Russia. Of course, this has consequences. So he is talking about taking more nuclear warheads out of storage and deploying them operationally. at least on standby or however they want to, on the end of their button that they want to press. And they do seem increasingly to want to press that button. So here is Francis Boyle's Substack. And a day or two ago, he was talking about the new Pentagon War Manual, reducing us to the level of Nazis. Now, in fact, this document was published in, July, or at least updated in July 2023. It was originally published in June 2015. It comes from the Office of General Counsel for the Department of Defense in the United States. And let's have a look at what it does. First of all, it authorizes the use of depleted uranium munitions, napalm, cluster munitions, mines, and herbicides. Now, Vanessa can correct me if I'm wrong in a second, but my understanding is that cluster munitions are banned internationally. But this new defense, what do we call it, policy seems to certainly permit that. They go on to say, this is a direct quote now, there's no general prohibition in treaty or customary international law on the use of nuclear weapons. And of course, this is ignoring all the various international conventions and treaties that exist for non-proliferation and non-use of nuclear weapons. And this is getting to be a pretty dangerous kind of rhetoric that we're seeing out of the United States and NATO at the moment. So going back to Francis Boyle's Substack, this is one of the points it's made. The Pentagon's new law of war manual sanctioning nuclear attacks and the killing of civilians, quotes, reads like it was written by Hitler's Ministry of War. He went on to say, historically, this is a terrible development. We're reducing ourselves to the level of Nazis. It really is quite a terrible development, but the rhetoric builds and the pressure builds on Russia and China, and how are they supposed to respond? Because this pressure isn't just about what's happening now. This has been going on for the last couple of decades, as we have been reporting consistently throughout that time. But at the recent NATO defense ministers meeting, Jens Stoltenberg had this to say.
On Ukraine, we have agreed on a plan that sets out how NATO will lead the coordination of security assistance and training. This will allow NATO leaders to launch this effort at the Washington summit in July. It will consist of a NATO command located at a US facility in Wiesbaden and at logistical nodes in the eastern part of the alliance. Across the alliance, this effort is expected to involve nearly 700 personnel from NATO and partner countries. These efforts do not make NATO a party to the conflict.
Do you agree with that statement?
I don't. No, I think they absolutely do make NATO party to the conflict. He looked suitably awkward whilst saying it, which is rather meaningless. But no, I mean, it seems to be following this sort of same statement that keeps being chucked out, which is that the best way to avoid war is to prepare for it. But I'm not entirely certain that people really grasp the concept of that properly.
No, and Vanessa, I mean, am I right about cluster munitions? They are banned internationally at this point.
Yep, they are. I can't remember if the US was a signatory, but in 2016, Textron, the main manufacturer in the US, allegedly halted production because they were being used extensively by the Saudi coalition against Yemeni civilians from March 2015 onwards. But of course, they've also been used in Ukraine by the NATO proxy forces against civilians in Donbass, the petal mines that Eva Bartlett, journalist and colleague, has written about extensively.
Yeah, and just briefly, Vanessa, I mean, it seems clear to me that Francis Boyle highlighting this Department of Defense document is important, because they are absolutely saying in that if there is a strategic need, don't worry about the civilian casualties. If you can demonstrate a strategic need to carry out a certain operation and there are massive civilian casualties, and it seems to me that it may well be that document which is preventing any criticism from the US side of what Israel's doing, because of course that would be sheer hypocrisy.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, that's pretty much what we see NATO and NATO allies doing. Civilian, this horrible word, collateral damage, is used liberally to cover up massacres. We saw it in Nusrat's camp last week, yes, when 274 people were killed to rescue 4 hostages and kill 3 others.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's move on to Ukraine then. And of course, over the weekend was the Ukraine Peace Summit, in inverted commas, because of course Russia wasn't there. So how it could possibly be a peace summit, I'm not entirely sure. But what's interesting is that several countries that were involved in it have refused to sign the plan. And Al Jazeera here speculating on why that might be. But nonetheless, some countries have refused to sign. And I think that is indicative of the reality of the Ukrainian situation at the moment. But Medvedev has published a post on Telegram, which we'll translate in 1 second, about the peace conference. So let's just have a look at what he had to say. He said, after all, to resolve the conflict, the sly Swiss shepherds called only the proven animals a crazy small boar who swallowed a sexual stimulant with his constant friend, a herd of dumb-headed Western Alpine sheep bleating blissfully about peace, as well as a pack of European guard dogs to guard the livestock. He's not mincing his words. He's drawing parallels with Animal Farm here. The dogs bark, spray poison saliva in all directions and keep order, and they need to keep an eye on it. The sheep often bleat out of place and get confused from the memorized formulas. At the head of the flock, there's an visibly present elderly, feeble-minded owner, can't imagine who that is, who has long since lost contact with reality and constantly freezes, looking at the sky with a detached, idiotic expression on his face. His family wouldn't let him go because of the progressive dementia, sending his dim-witted deputy to the mountains, who took a photo on a green lawn, said a memorized phrase, and quickly bolted home. Vanessa, this is obviously quite dark humor, but it's impossible to criticize because he has Biden at the very least down to a T.
Well, he's got everything down to a T, in my opinion.
Yes.
Perfect description.
Yes. Okay. Well, look, let's bring John Helmer on screen. And he's basically talking about the situation on the ground in Ukraine with respect to electrical infrastructure in this article, saying that that has become a major target for Russia in the special military operation, that 86% of Ukraine's electricity generating capacity has been destroyed. But it's not just their electricity generating capacity, it's also their heat networks, because of course the Ukraine's still full of massive heat networks for heating people's homes. There's a carryover from the Soviet era, and these heat networks are taking steam into people's homes to heat the central heating systems all over the place. So Ukraine looking not only at energy shortages in terms of electricity over the winter period, but also extreme cold in their homes because the heat networks aren't going to function. So he's quoting a US military source saying that this is Russian deep battle being fought, in fact, by the general staff while its operations continue to be restricted in Moscow for political reasons. Soon the impact will be impossible to cover up. For now, we know how bad it's getting by the lack of discussion about how bad it's getting. So I think that is a very telling comment because, of course, we get an idea of how bad it is because of the lack of discussion. And finally, I just want to bring I do apologize, I can't remember the position that this Ukrainian holds, but basically finance minister related. Strong armies must be underpinned by strong economies to win wars. As we approach the deadline, we must urge our bondholders to continue productive and good faith negotiations with more substantial debt relief. Well, this is basically because Ukraine is about to fail to pay back $20 billion worth of bonds that are owing, and they are looking for a reorganization of that debt. So it's likely that the people that have bought those bonds are going to not only not going to get their $20 billion back, but they're probably not going to get $12 billion of that. So, a significant haircut coming for people that have been investing in Ukraine at the moment. Vanessa, let's move to Lebanon.
Yes, we've been talking about the potential for escalation for the past 9 months. We seem to be sort of incrementally escalating in attacks from the Israeli side and from the Hezbollah side in southern Lebanon. This was in the BBC. The White House questions Netanyahu's criticism over weapons delay. But it appears, if we look at what they're actually saying, A senior administration official confirmed to the BBC that delivery of thousands of £2,000 and other bombs had been paused, the first delay of US munitions to Israel, despite tens of thousands of Palestinians having been slaughtered. It goes on to say that, of course, the US is by far Israel's biggest source of weapons and ammunition, 3.5 billion pounds or £3 billion of military aid each year. The Biden administration will move forward with another major arms sale to Israel that includes 50 F-15 fighter jets worth more than 18 billion, US media reported, after two key Democratic holdouts signed off. Now, I've noticed today on social media that there's a lot of information being put out there that there was never any real freeze on weapons supply to Israel. This, again, I would say is part of the whole electioneering posturing by the Biden administration. However, what we've had in the last couple of days, which coincides with the Biden administration members like Blinken and Amos Hochstein visiting Arab states in the region and currently, I think, in Israel, the Hoopo mission, major security failure for Israel. Israel media outlets and officials continue to comment on the video published by Hezbollah, which was about 9 minutes long, to address the implications and messages that Hezbollah wanted to convey to Israel. Now, the fact is that Hezbollah flew its spy drone over vast swathes of occupied territory without detection. And in fact, the Israeli media was putting out messaging saying it was alarms had gone off, but they were false alarms. Other Israeli media also mentioned that Hezbollah's videos convey an unequivocal message to Israel, indicating that they are present inside Israel by air, land, and sea, planning for the future and capable of delivering severe blows. Filming these videos is a first-degree Israeli security failure, definitely, adding that the situation in the north is much worse than we imagine. Israeli journalist and expert on Arab affairs Jackie Hughey said that Hezbollah's video aimed to send a message that if Israel does not reduce its firepower in Lebanon, Hezbollah will have to use greater force and that Haifa is within its reach. He also pointed out that this message accompanies the verbal messages that Hezbollah is sending to Tel Aviv. So let's just have a very quick look at it as a summary of the video that Hezbollah took. I mean, quite extraordinary intelligence gathering that Hezbollah was able to do. And this was in Al Mayadeen. Experts decode messages in Hezbollah's Hoopo mission video. In the same context, the experts told Al Mayadeen that Hezbollah's video includes three types of potential targets: military, the military industrial complex, and the Haifa military base and naval base, of course. Civilian, the Krayot area, 200,000 settlers are in that area, and strategic, Haifa port and its facilities. They added that the three types of potential targets are meant to establish a three-dimensional balance of deterrence against Israel with each dimension relating to the type of target Israel may strike in any confrontation with Lebanon. So this was a very strong message being sent, of course, at the same time that Amos Hochstein was in Lebanon to discuss with some of the resistance leaders a potential de-escalation. Hochstein returned from Lebanon in a state of pessimism, having spoken to, as I said, leaders within the resistance who, of course, are not going to withdraw from the southern border with the occupied territories. And this was from Yaron Avraham, who's the political affairs analyst for Channel 12 in Israel. He pointed out that Hochstein, before traveling to Lebanon, met with Netanyahu, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi, who's in charge, I think, of the operations in the northern occupied territories, Benny Gantz, Yair Lapid, Isaac Herzog, and a group of Israeli officials. Now, what is becoming clear out of these talks, and Blinken has reiterated this, is that Hezbollah is increasing the pressure in response to Israeli aggression, but also putting on pressure to the United States to effectively push through the withdrawal of Zionist forces from Gaza and basically fulfill the peace deal that America is claiming that it concocted. So Blinken has admitted that the Gaza ceasefire is key to calming the northern front. And of course, while all of this is going on, Israel has effectively continued its genocide and massacres in Israel, killing and injuring Palestinians in Rafah, in Mawazi camp in the south, which was designated a safe zone, and across pretty much all areas of Gaza, continuing to decimate infrastructure and the ability of Palestinians to eat, drink clean water, or simply survive.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that, Vanessa. Okay, let's come back to Europe then and snooping. And of course, we have been making the point that the Online Safety Bill and the Investigatory Powers Act amendments permit the UK government to demand that any company providing end-to-end encryption services in a chat application, for example, need to make it available. This was the National Crime Agency, National Strategic Assessment of Serious and Organised Crime, talking about this. The enhanced privacy and the use of encryption is impacting on law enforcement's ability to collect intelligence and evidence. And then more recently, a week or two ago, the Joint Declaration of European Police Chiefs, including the UK, by the way, two key capabilities are crucial to supporting online safety. First, the ability of technology companies to provide law enforcement investigations in response to lawful authority with strong safeguards and oversight. So that's okay then. The data of suspected criminals on their service. This is known as lawful access. And they were worried particularly about child sexual abuse imagery, because this is always the excuse that's used for this and so on. And they went on to highlight the need to give them access or to remove end-to-end encryption, because without that access or removal of that system, we would simply not be able to keep the public safe, is what they said. Well, the EU is busy pushing through their version of this at the moment. It was supposed to happen today. It's more likely to happen tomorrow. But if we look at this document, it's talking about all services that provide any kind of chat functionality and the ability to hoover up data on those services. And they're saying here are services which enable direct interpersonal and interactive exchange of information merely as a minor ancillary feature that is intrinsically linked to another service, such as chat, and similar functions as part of gaming, image sharing, and video hosting are equally at risk of misuse, and they should also be covered by this regulation. So it's quite incredible that this is being, of course, led by the Belgian EU Council presidency. They want bulk chat control searches, and they are saying basically this isn't just about client-side scanning, which means scanning on your device, scanning on your mobile phone, or what they also want the ability to moderate any content which is being uploaded to a service, and they want to include AI detection in this. Now, of course, there's dangers to this. One is, of course, mass surveillance is a totalitarian tool. It's also actually pretty ineffective, but it also undermines data security, and this is the big danger as far as I'm concerned. One of the big dangers, because if governments can get access to data, then hackers can get access to data, and we've already seen so many data breaches on so many platforms now, including government, National Health Service, and a whole bunch of other places, that we really should be treating this whole thing with major contempt. Now, in the meantime, the National Police Chiefs Council just found this quite interesting, talking about child sexual abuse and exploitation analysis. This is from January this year. But they're saying here that for the first time, a new report from the Vulnerability, Knowledge and Practice Programme sets out publicly a clear, detailed picture of reported child sexual abuse and exploitation crimes across England and Wales. The analysis sets out the consistent growth of CSAE reported to police, with 107,000 crimes reported to policing, a figure that has risen significantly in the last 10 years. More than half of child sexual abuse offences were committed by children, a significant increase from what was previously known. The report also shows that over a third of child sexual abuse contact crimes take place within a family environment. Group-based CSAE accounts for 5% of all identified and reported crimes. So, it might be possible to argue that there is a massive prevalence of child sexual abuse imagery on the internet, and that there has been a growth of that over the last number of years. But the kind of growth that you see on the internet with imagery, of course, those images have to be taken whenever children are actually being abused. We haven't seen similar growth in the number of crimes being reported. So there are a number of issues there that might be discussed. Is the rise of sharing of imagery as a result of the ability of the use of encryption, or is it because, in fact, it's easier now to take that type of material, produce that type of material in the first place? And I find it fascinating that the rise in criminal activity is particularly significant amongst children, and I question then why that would be. Is that because of the type of child sexual education regime that we have in the West at the moment, or is there something else going on? There are many questions to be asked around this whole issue of child sexual abuse, and it's not right to use it as a sort of poster child for the kind of censorship and mass surveillance that governments in the UK and the EU and the United States are proposing at the moment. And I would suggest that perhaps this issue, plus the other issues of warfare and other things which are absolutely not on the general election agenda at the moment, need to be. Okay, Charles, let's move on then to, fish and seeds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not together, but a very quick update on a couple of things that I've reported on in recent times. On Monday, the Genetic Modification Inspectorate updated its seed audit program, in which they specifically make reference to the information about the introduction of the Genetic Technology Precision Breeding Act of last year. So we'll just read the critical bit of text here, talking about the government taking a step-by-step approach. It will enable precision breeding technologies for plants first, followed by animals later. Precision breeding technologies, such as gene editing, can make targeted genetic changes. And then critically, the highlighted text here, they say the changes can arise through traditional breeding and natural processes and can produce beneficial traits. However, of course, they don't have any evidence of that because it's too early to be able to determine whether or not that is the case. Further, it's far too early to determine the effect of such a product on either the human gut and digestion or indeed the environment within which it's grown. So they're very confident, apparently, about what they believe to be the case, but they don't know. With that in mind, it's worth pointing out that there's just been an announcement about the development of strains of wheat that haven't had any attention for over 100 years, the Watkins varieties, hidden genetic treasure. And they say that, that was from Seafood Source. That was from...
Yeah,
my apologies.
There we go.
Phys.org, but it refers to an article in Nature. And it talks about 60% of the genetic diversity found in this Watkins collection of wheat is unused, providing an unprecedented opportunity to improve modern wheat and sustainably feed a growing global population. Now, they make it sound terribly simple, but of course, the same thing is true here. If the human system and indeed genetic makeup is used to a particular diet or a particular strain of wheat, to reintroduce something that hasn't been in existence for well over 100 years is likely to have very, very significant effects. But again, that's not talked about, that's not dealt with. It's as though this is just a positive. And then switching to fish, which again I spoke about recently, Seafood Source reports that the UK, Norway and Faroe Islands have reached an agreement on quotas, but essentially it's a net loss for the UK. So on the one hand, they're allowing mackerel stocks to recover, but also we're ceding more of our fishing rights to Norway than they are to us. So it says the agreement will also see Norway transfer 23,660 tonnes of its mackerel quota in 2024 to the UK to be fished either in the UK's exclusive economic zone or international waters. And the UK is granting Norway similar provision, but for a great deal more, 123,330 tonnes of mackerel. So again, just with food security in mind and considering not just the land, but the sea, we wait to find out where this is likely to go with regard to fisheries and access to fish stocks.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Charles. Thank you to Vanessa as well. We got to finish there for today. I'm going to thank everybody for watching. We'll be back in a few minutes if you're a UK column member for some extra. Otherwise, don't forget the interview tomorrow and 1 p.m. as usual on Friday for the next news. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.